I support H.R. 5163, which would prohibit outdoor camping on public property in the District of Columbia. On March 28th, President Trump signed an executive order titled Making the District of Columbia Safe and Beautiful, which sought to restore order to our capital city. A key aspect of this plan is directed the National Park Service to remove homeless encampments on federal land. Under this legislation, a person shall be fined not more than $500, imprisoned for not more than 30 days, or both for camping on public property. This is a very important step to making our nation's capital safe for residents and visitors. I want to thank the sponsor of this legislation, Representative Timmons from South Carolina, for his leadership on this issue, and I urge my colleagues to support the Timmons bill. I now recognize the ranking member for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose H.R. 5163. This bill fines and criminalizes the homeless and people that are unhoused in D.C. Now, we should be clear, homelessness is a challenge across the country, and we should be doing everything to address it. But a bill that makes it a crime to be unhoused or poor is wrong and immoral. A bill that does nothing to increase housing supply, nothing to increase services, nothing to make housing more affordable is wrong and should not be considered by this body. Now, a person who lives in a tent can't pay a $500 fine. So instead, we're going to put them in jail. There's nothing for them when they get out. So they end up going back on the street. Now they have charges on top of that. It'll be harder to get new housing, harder to get a job, harder to assist them get back into society. We're just trapping people in another cycle. Now, instead of criminalizing the poor and those that are unhoused, local officials have been working to reduce DC's homeless population by 20%, by the way, which they've done between 2015 and 2025 through evidence-based activities. The district has expanded supportive housing, mental health services, job training, and substance abuse treatments. Now, it's important to note that many veterans live on our capital streets as well. And district officials and local community groups are working tirelessly to house veterans and provide them with the care that they need. So now, on top of this, we're also going to be criminalizing our veterans that we're trying to assist on the streets of the district. Now, I've also heard from my colleague, Ranking Member Takano of the Veteran Affairs Committee, who has said, and I just want to quote this, criminalizing homelessness, particularly for veteran homelessness, threatens to undo our critical efforts and progress in ending veteran homelessness. And from my perspective, as ranking member of House Committee on Veterans Affairs, these penalties and displacements imposed by this bill would actively hurt every population that we're supposed to be helping, end quote. And that's his statement, which I'll submit for this in the record. Now, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert the rest of his letter for this record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Now, America's homeless population doesn't just include veterans, of course, but also families with children and women who are fleeing domestic violence. But it appears that Donald Trump and the majority don't care. Now, President Trump shut down the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, which sought to explore and address the root causes of homelessness. And my Republican colleagues voted to block D.C. from spending $1 billion of its own tax revenues, money that can be used for real solutions to homelessness, including more affordable housing and wraparound services. We should look at ways to address the affordable housing crisis. This bill does nothing to provide more housing, nothing to provide more support, yet it's once again criminalizing people that need our support on the streets of D.C. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this backward legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the sponsor of the bill, Mr. Timmons from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start with my prepared remarks, and then I'm going to address the ridiculous things that were just said by the ranking member. So first, the District of Columbia is more than just a city. It's the front porch of our nation. Millions of visitors from across the country and around the world come here every year to see their government, their monuments, and their history. They expect and they deserve to see a capital city that is clean, safe, and welcoming. When our public spaces are overtaken by encampments, that sense of order and pride is lost, not just for visitors, but for the residents of the district who use these streets every single day. My bill, the Clean and Managed Public Spaces Act, or the CAMPS Act, bans camping on public property in D.C., ensuring that the capital of the greatest country in the world reflects the dignity, safety, and pride of its people. And when you get down to it, that is what this bill is about, people. Allowing individuals to sleep in tents on the streets is not compassion. It is neglect. A tent is not housing, a sidewalk is not a home. And leaving men, women, and families exposed to the elements, to crime, to addiction, and to despair is the opposite of what a caring society should do. Public safety is also at stake. Encampments have too often become sites of violence, drug trafficking, fires, rape, sexual assaults, residents walking their children to school. Seniors going to the grocery store and visitors walking to the monuments should not have to navigate tense and hazardous conditions. Our public spaces must remain open, orderly, and safe for all. By passing the Camps Act, we send a clear message. America's capital city will be clean, managed, and worthy of the nation it represents. At the same time, we reaffirm our commitment to helping the most vulnerable, not by abandoning them to sleep in unsafe tents, but to ensure they have a real chance at recovery, stability, and dignity. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in supporting this legislation. Let's restore the beauty, safety, and pride of our nation's capital while ensuring that every individual in need is offered more than a tent. They are offered hope. Now to address the comments from the ranking member. All that this does is give law enforcement the ability to get these people off the streets and get them help. Functionally, a conditional discharge would be given. They would be sent somewhere to get the mental health counseling, the drug addiction counseling, whatever they need to get back on their feet. This is not going to result in criminal penalties. This is going to give law enforcement the tool to get these people the help that they need. By the way, file an amendment if you have a better idea. But I'm not going to have people come here and tell them that they can't walk to dinner. They can't walk around the mall. That's just completely unacceptable. For the last 6.5 years, I've been doing that. I told my commanding officer that he had to walk. He could not walk from his hotel to his restaurant. You know what happened? He did. There was an active shooter. There was an active shooter right there. And he called me. He said, yeah, I probably shouldn't have walked outside. Had another military colleague come. He had to run away from a homeless person that had a knife. I had my chief of staff had to move because somebody kept defecating on his damn front lawn. This is not how this world is going to be in Washington, D.C. A nation's capital in decline is a nation in decline. If you want to say, let's provide additional services to allow these people to get back on their feet, I'm all in. But what this does is it takes them off the street and it gives the city of D.C. the ability to force them into safe conditions where they can shower, where they can have a toilet, where they can get food and clothes and mental health counseling and drug addiction counseling. That is what we need to do. That is the humane thing to do. And it is immoral. It is immoral to allow these people to live under bridges, cold, hot, rain, whatever it is. It is immoral to allow them to defecate in the streets. It is immoral to allow them to harass our visitors. And we're not going to stand for it. President Trump has put an end to it. He signed an executive order bringing in the National Guard, and I tell you what, it doesn't matter who they voted for. The district's residents are happy. They are, it is palpable. It is palpable the way that this city has changed. Everyone is safe. And by the way, to date, they haven't actually had to draw a weapon because you know what happens when criminals know that there are consequences for their actions? They don't commit crimes. When you have a half dozen National Guard soldiers walking around making sure that nothing bad is going to happen to the residents of the District of Columbia and ensuring the peace and safety, crime has gone down 78%. So we're going to continue to do the job that the city of D.C. should be doing, and we're going to get this city back in shape because there is a new day in the world. There's new leadership in the world. Not only is the capital of our nation going to be safe and prosperous, but the world will benefit from the new leadership in the White House. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose this undemocratic and paternalistic bill, which establishes a new D.C. crime.
Write that down.
The over 700,000 D.C. residents, the majority of whom are black and brown, are capable and worthy of governing themselves. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letters opposing this bill from D.C. Mayor Miriam Bowser and the entire D.C. Council and D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab.
Without objection, so ordered.
The United States knows how to prevent and end homelessness, including by investing in housing, good-paying jobs, and health care. Criminal penalties are not among the solutions. I strongly oppose criminalizing homelessness. However, whether to criminalize it should be a decision for D.C. alone. I respect home rule. This bill makes it unlawful in DC to camp outdoors on public property. The penalty is a fine of up to $500, up to 30 days in jail, or both. I note that DC municipal regulations already prohibit camping on public property, and the penalty is a fine of up to $300. Separately, DC law already prohibits crowding, obstructing, or accommodating public property. The penalty is a fine of up to $500, up to 90 days in jail, or both. I want to discuss democracy or lack thereof in the District of Columbia. The DC Council has 13 members. If its residents do not like how the members vote, residents can vote them out of office or pass a ballot measure. That is called democracy. Congress has 535 voting members. None are elected by DC residents. If DC residents do not like how members vote on local DC matters, residents cannot vote them out of office or pass a ballot measure. That is the antithesis of democracy. DC residents have all of the obligations of American citizenship, including paying federal taxes, serving on juries, and registering with Selective Service. Yet they are denied full local self-government and voting representation in Congress. The DC Statehood Bill, H.R. 51, the Washington, D.C. Admission Act, is the solution. The DC Statehood Bill would reduce the size of the federal district from 68 square miles to 2 square miles, which would consist of the White House, the Capitol, the Supreme Court, and the National Mall, and remain under the control of Congress. The residential and commercial areas of DC would be a new state. Congress has both the moral obligation and the constitutional authority to pass a DC statehood bill. I urge a note on the Clean and Manage Public Safeties Act, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just reiterate, because I think this gets lost a lot, that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 is very crystal clear. Congress has exclusive, and that's the word used, exclusive authority over the legislation of the district. That's it. Congress, though, in 73, decided that it would grant some authority and delegate some authority to the district, and it did. But Congress has every constitutional authority and right to weigh in on these decisions as it is done. And I'll just point out something. On the last bill that we talked about, just a couple of years ago, that was a bipartisan bill that went up and was signed by Democrat President Joe Biden, regulating the criminal sentencing guidelines of the district. And somehow the district is saying, well, gee, this is it's unusual and unreal and inappropriate this time. I'll yield my time now to Mr. Timmons.
I want to thank my friend from Arizona. I guess I'm going to start by saying that if the District of Columbia was enforcing its own criminal code, we wouldn't have this problem. But it's not. It refuses to, and that's because the City Council doesn't back the men and women of law enforcement. And 5,600 people prior to the president signing an executive order were living in the streets. It was absolute chaos. The encampments, the drug use, the crime, all of these things occurred because the District of Columbia violated its obligation to enforce the rule of law. That's why we're here. And that's why there's a federal statute that is being proposed that would do the same thing that the D.C. city criminal ordinance would do. So That's number one. Number two, and I wish that the ranking member were still here, hundreds of municipalities around the country have implemented bans on outdoor camping in public spaces. Many are in California, where Governor Newsom threatened to withhold funding from cities and counties that did not clear encampments from public property. In fact, Long Beach, California, where the ranking member was the mayor, has had a long-standing ban on outdoor camping in public spaces, and the Long Beach Police Department has enforced this ban by making hundreds of arrests and issuing hundreds of citations this year, making Long Beach safer for its residents and visitors. If you want to check, it's Long Beach Municipal Code, Section 942-110. My bill aims to do just what the ranking member's criminal ordinance in Long Beach does. If the city of Washington, D.C. refuses to enforce its own criminal code, we are going to give federal law enforcement the tools to do what they refuse to, and to do exactly what the mayor's former city of Long Beach is doing probably as much as any city in the country. So I hope everyone recognizes the need for public safety in our nation's capital, just as Long Beach leadership has in their own city, and support this common sense bill. I'm going to again say, all that this bill does is gives a tool for federal law enforcement to do what the Washington, D.C. police refuse to do. And these people are not necessarily going to result in criminal convictions. It's going to give law enforcement and prosecutors the ability to force them into getting the help that they need. If you want to file an amendment to provide additional resources, so be it. But we have to give federal law enforcement tools to do the job that the D.C. city officials refuse to. I urge support of this bill. Our nation's capital so badly needs it. I yield back, I yield back to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
I thank the gentleman for his comments and associate myself with him and yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Would a gentleman yield for a question from Arizona?
Does Arizona have a question? I mean, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Go ahead and ask a question.
I just want to ask you a question about, as it relates to DC. I mean, do you think it's fair that there's over 700,000 people who live here without proper representation, who pay taxes?
Let me ask you this. Did you take an oath to adhere to the Constitution of the United
I
States?
did. The Constitution of the United States doesn't prohibit us from making DC a state. It says that there should be a federal district run by Congress, and the bill that Ms. Norton is pushing would amend and change the federal district.
So I'll
contain
reclaim my time because it's only 9 seconds. I oppose DC statehood, unequivocally. But let me just say this. If you adhere to the Constitution, then you understand that we clearly have the exclusive authority over DC legislation. Yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Frost.
Just to continue off of that point, which I think is true, you keep bringing up the Constitution, but the Constitution does not prohibit Congress from ensuring that the 700,000 people who live in Washington, D.C. can live in a state and have a state. It says there needs to be a federal district that Congress, yes, has authority over. And what we're trying to do is make it so we change the boundaries of that federal district to be the places that we work, the United States Congress, the White House, the National Mall. So these 700,000 people can have proper representation because they're paying taxes. The Constitution does not say you can't make Washington, D.C. and make sure that these 700,000 people have a state. And I think it's really important to know that. The other thing is the founders, in 1790, there were fewer than 5,000 people living in the District of Columbia. Now there's over 700,000.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Sure.
What does that have to do with the 5,600 people that were living on the streets 6 weeks ago?
Good question. I'll reclaim my time. I'll get right to that because you brought up that there's so many people, cities across the entire country that are criminalizing homelessness, and it's true, it's going on. After the disastrous Supreme Court decision, Grants Pass versus Johnson, we see cities across the country criminalizing homelessness. Hell, my own city of Orlando has done it too, and I think it's despicable. I think it's wrong if a blue city does it. I think it's wrong if a red city does it. Because the problem here is you're not looking to solve homelessness, you're looking to hide it. You're not looking to provide an alternative to living on the street. You're looking to brush it away to another place.
Will the gentleman yield?
And not yet. And I think it's important. The other thing is the sponsor of this bill brought up, well, we're just giving them a tool. The tool is criminalization. That's the tool that you're handing federal law enforcement, that they can be fined and jailed. Further putting people who are having a tough time in life living on the streets into this cycle. You were talking about supporting services. Well, you have a chance. Donald Trump's FY26 budget, he wants to cut HUD by 44%. I'll yield to you if you can tell me if you're going to stand up to that. You were saying that you want to have services for people. This would make massive cuts to affordable housing, homeless services, rental assistance, all the things that help us keep people off the streets. Will you join us in opposing that?
That's a great talking point. We both know that the funding's not going to be different. So
the funding will be different.
A budget
the number
is an
for the
aspirational
programs.
document.
I'll reclaim my time. The number for the programs that help homeless services will go down. Do you support that?
The president's budget is always an aspirational document, and we both know. And again, what?
I'll
how
reclaim my time. Are you
talking
saying it
about-
doesn't matter what the? I mean, your president's saying he wants to cut HUD by 44%.
We have $37 trillion
I'll
in debt
reclaim
on
my
a $2
time.
trillion annual
I'll reclaim my
deficit.
time. 44% he wants to cut HUD. He wants to cut homeless services for your district and my district. Do you agree with that? I'll yield if you can answer yes, yes or no, really.
You and I both know that the funding will be no different than last year.
Oh, so
And
you'll
we're gonna move forward.
So you'll work at opposing the president's request.
I know how this system works, and I know that it requires 60 votes in the Senate to change government funding, and we're not going to get 60 votes to do anything. So we're going to have a CR. But again, how are you going to help the 5,600 people? You say that this
I'll
is not a
reclaim my
tool.
time. I'll reclaim my. How are we going to help them? By fighting to ensure that the president and your party doesn't further erode the little services that we have in this country. We need housing, not handcuffs. We have a housing crisis in this country.
the gentleman yield.
Every time the rent goes up $100, homelessness goes up 9%. Let me say it one more time. Every time the rent goes up $100, homelessness goes up 9%. Homelessness is a housing problem. And you have no solutions for us here. You're talking about, again, trying to hide a problem rather than fix a problem. It is both cheaper and less challenging for us as a nation to keep people housed than, yes, to help them when they're on the streets. We need to help people when they're on the streets, but we need to fund rental assistance, transitional housing, permanent supporter housing, shelters, all this suite of services that help us keep our people on top of a certain line. Because it does cost more, and it is harder, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Will the
And
gentleman yield?
and the president that you follow and that you are lauding wants to make a historic cut to the few services that we have so we can keep people from off the streets. And I think it's despicable. And you come here and try to act like there's a problem with us because we have a problem with you working to criminalize homelessness. People see
Sorry,
beyond
it's
that.
already criminal. The D.C. City Police are not enforcing it. So what do you want us to do?
The tool you want to give federal law enforcement is allow them to go and arrest people who are sleeping on the streets because they have nowhere else to sleep. We shouldn't be criminalizing homeless people for the failures of government. Let's step up. Let's try to work together and ensure that we eradicate homelessness and fix this housing crisis. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say that, what Republican policies right now are just hell bent on beating Americans down, not lifting them up. And what you all are attempting to do in D.C. right now is just a forecast for what they actually want for the entire country. And just first of all, before I even go any further, I just want to state that when we talk about solutions and solution-driven policy, this is just not it, right? This is nothing more than literally criminalizing homelessness. And when we talk about whether or not allowing somebody to stay in a tent who has nowhere else to go, whether or not it's moral or humane, well, the reality is that there's $150 million in HUD grants that would directly eradicate homelessness that's frozen, that is not being used, and the Trump administration is choosing to do that. We are not solving the problem. We're not asking ourselves at all right now in this committee, well, why are people experiencing homelessness? Well, let's think about it. And my colleague from Florida started to get into it. We are in a housing crisis. We know that. That isn't a D.C. thing. That's an American thing. It's all over the country. Wages have been stagnant for decades. Grocery prices have not come down. The student loan crisis is ballooning. Joblessness is at a high, and instead of addressing that, there are more people seeking a job right now than there are jobs for them to get into. The president is firing the messenger because he doesn't ever want to deal with things, just like the homeless crisis. He wants to sweep that also under the rug. And we also just saw the largest wealth transfer from the poor to the rich in the bill passed by Republicans. And this is all after Trump forced D.C. to clear out encampments and then shut down the Interagency Council on Homelessness. And your Republican Congressman Zorrell, it's a crime to not have a home, but there won't be any resources to help you if you are experiencing homelessness. You're going to just be charged and fined and imprisoned, and it's going to make your life harder. Trump and Republicans are treating people like they're subhuman, people at their lowest, and many of these folks are veterans that served this country. It's callous and it's evil. Criminalization does not end homelessness. This is lazy and dishonest policymaking. We have solutions for the homelessness crisis in this country. Republicans are just refusing to implement them because they don't believe that the cost is worth it. They don't believe it's worth pulling you out of poverty. They don't believe it's worth educating folks in the district. They don't believe it's worth feeding folks in the district. That's why they cut SNAP. They don't believe it's worth you being healthy. That's why they cut Medicaid. They would rather fine and jail you. They'd rather criminalize you and make your lives even harder, perpetuating these cycles of poverty and inequality. Criminalizing homelessness actually just makes the problem worse, according to research, not just me, research. Each move-along order or encampment eviction contributes to further marginalization. It perpetuates these cycles of harm. Research shows that when people experiencing homelessness are forced to spend time in jail, they're often released with nowhere to stay. They are often poor due to loss of possessions, and they may be in worse physical health. Jail time can also disrupt access to public benefits, to shelter, and other resources. Even when detained temporarily, people experiencing homelessness have lost their jobs, their vehicles, their licenses, the very things that can bring them out of the cycle. And when you hold people on cash bail, like the other bill that's up today proposes to do, they lose all of that before they've even been convicted of a crime. This is what we're seeing, going to see in D.C. Right now, the district has worked to increase their shelter capacity, but it's only a Band-Aid on the problem because the Trump administration has failed to coordinate any federal resources to help find a permanent, long-term housing solution or address the root causes. D.C. is already so inaccessible due to the insanely high rent. Thriving Black and brown communities have been pushed aside and priced out so that wealthy developers can make a larger profit and Congress people can feel more comfortable. Right now, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in D.C. is $2,300 per month, and the cost of living is 40% higher than the national average. How are people supposed to afford houses here? This committee doesn't want to end homelessness because if they did, they would be empowering the district with a budget and the resources to tackle the problems themselves. They'd be working to hold developers accountable, raising the minimum wage, expanding mental health care, veteran support, passing Medicare for all, but instead, they're here stripping away these folks' opportunities to govern themselves. And we still have not passed the billion-dollar budget fix in D.C. This bill, along with Trump's executive order, punishes people for simply existing. It's not the way that the American people should be treated, or especially the people in D.C. I urge my colleagues to oppose it, and I yield back.
Ms. Lee, would you yield to a question?
I don't have any time.
Okay. I'm pretty lenient. I'm just wondering.
Colleagues on the Democratic side, keep that in mind. He's very lenient.
Did Washington, D.C. have a homeless problem when Joe Biden was president and
the United States has had a homeless the United States has had a homeless problem in and out of administrations. This whole thing pretending that it's a Democrat or a Republican bill, but let me tell you, when President Biden was the president, we had a Republican majority in the House. We have a trifecta with Republicans right now. You all have the opportunity to do something different. You know the solutions that exist. And I'm wondering, when will you propose them? It's Trump now. Will you propose them now?
No.
No, you won't.
No,
Thank you.
no.
Chairman,
Listen.
since you're being lenient, Chairman, can I ask a question of the gentlelady?
No.
I'll
Will the
recognize.
gentlelady answer a question?
Mr. Donalds is next, then we'll go
answer
to.
my question? Okay, all right.
Mr. Donald, you want to be recognized for 5 minutes?
Yes, sir.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. a couple things. My colleague went through a lot of items, so I'm gonna try to address them. Let's start with housing. If you're gonna really talk about housing, one of the big things we have to fix in our country is accessibility to building materials. The reason why accessibility to building materials in the United States continues to rise is because of the overregulation in this town by this Congress over decades in Washington, D.C. So if you want to address housing and the affordability of housing and the attainability of housing, maybe Republicans and Democrats, we could work together on something like NEPA reform and other regulatory reforms to make it easier to get the materials to build housing in the first place. I wonder if my Democratic colleagues would like to go along with reforming the regulatory process in this town, which increases the financial burden on companies that have to procure the material to even build the housing to deliver it to people. Education, I already know where they stand on this one. Republicans, we have long since stood for school choice here in the District of Columbia and all across the United States. If you examine academic attainment in areas that do not have school choice versus those that do, like my home state of Florida, it is clear that kids, even at the bottom, are learning at faster rates than they are in other jurisdictions where they don't allow school choice. DC has been a tug and a play with school choice. Democrats want to get rid of it. Republicans come back into power. We actually want to provide it. Go talk to the moms in D.C. They want to have a say on where their child goes to school. They want to have an opportunity for their child to succeed. Let's talk about another issue adding to the cost, because if you want to talk about homelessness, it's housing and it's also costs. Energy. My Democratic colleagues, all they want to do is have more regulation in the energy space. They want to have us buy solar panels and windmills from China, as opposed to drilling for oil in the United States, building nuclear power plants in the United States, which is cheaper and readily available energy for everyone. You want to lower the cost of what it takes for somebody to live in an apartment in DC or anywhere else in the country? How about working with us to lower the per kilowatt hour? Because everybody's got to deal with that. Rich, middle income, poor. Let's talk about public services. This is a good one. I like talking about this one. Let's talk about this one. Republicans, we have long since believed that people who are really destitute, they should be able to get the help that they need. But what we will not support are bloated programs where we know there is waste, fraud, and abuse. And when we go to our Democratic colleagues and we say, hey, let's just make sure that the people who qualify are the people that qualify, they say no. They would rather just have more money go out the door knowing that it's going to people who are not qualified for the programs. That doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. I heard the talk from my colleague, but again, it was all talk. What was her solutions? Universal health care? That's not a solution. Universal health care has failed in every country that it has tried. People want to say, oh, but what about Canada? Canada, yes, they have a universal system. You know what they also have? They have a private system layered on top for people who are rich. And then some of their people come to the United States to get the procedures they can't get in Canada. That's not a solution. You see, folks, let's talk about government spending. This is a good one. There is a false notion in politics and in this town that if you just spend more money, everything's going to be okay. The truth is you can't spend more money. When we go as a government to the treasury markets, because we have to borrow the money that doesn't come in taxes, we borrow that money. And when you go borrow that money, what you actually do is decrease the purchasing power of every other dollar in circulation. So the very people that you try to lecture us about saying you want to help, you're hurting. Because when you devalue the purchasing power of every American dollar, the rich guy's going to be all right. It's the poor who suffer when you devalue our currency because you continue to spend too much and borrow too much. So there are solutions. I say let's work on them. But the left-wing solutions that have been brought to this town year over year over year, oh yeah, they sound good. They sound great in TV ads, but they do not work. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Simon.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the conversation. I don't know how many folks in this chamber have ever experienced not having a key. I have, and I was a very, very young woman, and I was a client of an NGO called the Homeless Prenatal Program, and that's exactly what their mission was, is to provide support for pregnant homeless mothers. And in my 5 minutes, I just want to lift up the mother that I met in DC who lives with her children in her car. When the police tap on her window at night and demand that she get out, she was forced to tell them that she's waiting for shelter after leaving a domestic violence situation that almost killed her. I want to make clear that the DC Housing Authority, the wait list, has been shut down for over a decade. Families can apply, but they will be on that wait list for almost a decade, and that is consistent all around the country. The door is locked even before homeless families knock. I wonder if the author checked in with Catholic Charities or any of the daily shelters and looked at the daily count. For the shelters that are open in Washington, D.C., we know that folks are kicked out in the daytime. If you have done homelessness work, if you work with homeless families, you know that. The shelters are full. Year-round shelters in this city are at capacity. Now, I agree, sleeping on the concrete is beneath human dignity. I also agree that the job of law enforcement could and should be to bring folks to resource, but understanding that there is no permanent resource with over 1,000+ people sleeping on the street that is long-term, law enforcement, under the guise of this amendment, would not be able to serve its intended mission. Instead, increasing an ever so roundabout of arresting and processing and holding homeless folks in detention, which, by the way, is 4 times as expensive as housing them. We can address poverty together, this committee, this Congress. But when you seek to arrest and jail people with no home, when you seek to arrest and problematize folks who are trying to get treatment when the treatment on demand does not exist, there are no beds. There are no beds. Call any service agency right now in DC. I will wait. We have to actually create solutions instead of creating Band-Aids where only one half has an adhesive. I'm all for creating homelessness solutions. I know what a good service agency can do for a homeless family, and pushing that family and that mother to go to school and to live in a safe space without vermin and without violence. I have been there. Instead, we have an administration that chooses to kick down those small organizations and say that they are DEI or they're not doing what it costs, and propping up institutions that instead criminalize. We know it's inefficient. We know the dollars and cents don't make sense. So let's have that conversation. And for those reasons, I cannot support this amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thanks. I want to just add, for the record, under unanimous consent, this letter from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Of course, they strongly oppose this bill.
Without objection to order, any other member seek recognition? Mr. Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague from California just spoke very eloquently about the human experience of trying to find safe housing for you and for your child, for your family. I think we have to remember, as we debate policy where we're just looking at tools, that criminalizing human beings very rarely gets us to the goal that we think we are heading towards. We saw a dramatic decrease in violent crime after the Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid, and folks had access to meaningful mental and behavioral health care. We've seen a dramatic decrease in homelessness when cities and other organizations focus on a housing first model, to give people access to a door that closes, a key that locks it, a safe roof over their heads. We don't often see a dramatic long-term decrease in problematic behavior by criminalizing it. We might like to think that that's the answer, but that alone does not solve any of our problems. There are cities that are, and states like Utah, that are moving back from a housing first model, but I think it's important to outline that housing first shouldn't mean housing only. Giving folks a place to live is not a cure for all mental and behavioral health care needs. It's not a cure for every ill that plagues society, but it is an important first step. Permanent supportive housing programs that wrap around individuals and provide resources and sometimes transportation to get to a job interview or a counseling appointment or substance use disorder treatment. Those are real proven solutions to a homelessness crisis. And yes, building more housing is a solution to a housing crisis. I'm open to a debate, probably in another committee, about permitting reform and ways to ensure that we are building faster, but I can't leave unmentioned that one of the leading drivers for housing material price increase is Trump's tariff war. It's driving up the cost of building material. I'm married to a carpenter. I hear about it all the time. But when we're actually focused on meeting people's housing and healthcare needs, we see long-term solutions. The money pays off in the long run by getting upstream and meeting those needs before they become chronic, by providing VASH vouchers and increasing HUD funding, by ensuring that Medicaid demonstration projects like housing as healthcare are not cut because of the devastating cuts to Medicaid that this president and this Republican Congress have supported. Criminalizing homelessness and supporting sweeps does nothing but move people out of your line of sight. It doesn't solve our housing crisis. It moves people to another community, another place where you can't see them, where you don't have to walk by a human being sleeping on the sidewalk. I agree, that is not a solution. Human beings sleeping unsheltered on the sidewalk is not aligned with any of our values. But if we want to actually solve the problem, we have to have real, proven solutions and be willing to invest in the programs that provide the support that we need for real, lasting housing. I yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman?
Chair, does any other member seek recognition? Seeing none. The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.